Hey guys, um, I would like to kind of wrap up this peer review thing, and peer response thing by kind of going over this, um, list of some like what I consider like do's and don'ts. Some of them are from your readings, and some of them are some things I would just like for you to consider for this class and for the purposes of peer response in this class. Um, Peer response is, I guess, like moving forward. It's a kind of it's a big deal. We will start kind of working on like drafts for things for your um, inquiry project, and the goals, of course, will be to engage with your peers and practice not just composing processes for yourself, but practice critically reading your peers' texts. And by critically reading, I don't just mean evaluate. I mean like asking questions and talk about what you learn, and talk about what you like enjoyed and what you think that they're doing well, and talk about your opinions and reactions and kind of all of those things. So one thing I want you to think about with like what to do or not to do is, one, like try to consider where that person is, like, and what their goal is. Um, so I'm kind of here. If this person is writing and you disagree with their opinion, that's cool, and you could tell them what you think. But your goal as a reader is still to help them may express their thoughts as clearly as possible. So with that, I want to say one thing you don't want to do is like rewrite or take over, like tell them how they have to do it. One of the ways you want to think about it is giving suggestions, and saying, here's, how I think this could sound, or another way you could do this. I know it sounds weird to think about like giving praise, and I know that was from your reading. Um, One of the reasons that it is important to give praise is because it's important as a writer to know what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. Um, and if you don't know what your strengths are, it's really difficult to build off of them. And I find that a lot of students can tell me what they've been told they need to work on, but not that many can tell me like what people have told them they do well. So I find that a lot of people really aren't that in tune with what their strengths are, with what they're good at. So you don't know what strategies really are, like, things you're good at to use to build on, um, only what people need to work on, which isn't quite as helpful. So it's good to be balanced. Like, if the only way to know, like, I've had students who it turns out were really good at writing introductions, which I'm jealous of. But no one had ever told them that. But like time after time, like you notice, like as they write, like they're just really good at like opening and closing and getting people engaged, and it just seems to be like their thing. And they had some other things that they needed to work on. Some people, it turns out, are really good at writing conversationally while also like really using their sources well, and other people like struggle with that. So people have different strengths and weaknesses. It's important to know both and to be kind of balanced about that. Um, and not just have this sense that you need to look for what's wrong. And I think that when people come at peer response that way, it actually makes it super awkward, unnecessarily. Like, you're supposed to be reading their paper in a negative stance, and we say critical reading is not just figuring out what's wrong or what you disagree with. There's a lot of things that are included in being a reader. So it's not necessarily that you need to read their paper trying to figure out what they did wrong, like what they need to correct. But to read it as a reader, you wouldn't sit down online and read something and be looking for what's wrong with it. I mean, unless the opinion was like different than ours, and then we tend to read that way. Um, but you read like and think about like, oh, I didn't know that, I want to know more. Or you think, well, I agree or disagree with this. Or you think about like, what you're like learning. Like, you think about a lot of other things. We don't necessarily always read with that lens. So why do we read other like our peers work that way? Um, and another thing is to consider where they are in the process. Um, it's not a good idea to overwhelm people. I know people will say, like, tell me every single thing that I need to work on. But that makes it really difficult to prioritize, like, what to do when you actually go back to work on something. If you have a draft and you say, people tell you, like, you need to work on your thesis and you need more research and you need to rearrange and you need more examples here, and you mark like every grammar mistake that's wrong, then it's really difficult to figure out where you need to start and come up with like a plan. But if you're still trying to figure out like really what your paper is about and your readers can help you come up with a good solid thesis, that's a much better place. You can go work on that. You can read through the rest of your paper and add and make sure that it's solid, like with that point. And that's a better place. Like if people are still trying to figure out, like, are still trying to develop their paper and there are big holes in it, helping them fill in those holes is what they need. Correcting their commas is not what they need. It's not going to be what's most helpful to them right there. Typically, it's a good idea to give people maybe 3 or 4 things to work on that are like actually reflective of what they need right then to move the paper along, like where they are in that process. Are they still filling in holes? Are they like thinking about their research, and that's what you need to talk about? Like where are they? And that's probably the best place to be. Another thing is I guess like being honest in a balanced way. I mean, if you're in a class where people are going to be like eventually graded on what they're doing, it's not helpful just to say like your paper is good and hand it back. And I guess like it does, like if you think about like all the ways that you can respond that could be helpful, like it does make it less awkward because you don't want to be rude, but on the other hand, you don't want to sugarcoat either. Like you want to be able to say, here are a couple of things that I like, here are my questions, here's what I learned, here's an idea that I think that might help. Here's, I know that in class we're working on, this, like for the anti-bib, like I know we're working on like objective writing, and I noticed that like in these places you weren't really using that, and you've helped them in a lot of ways and also showed them something they can work on for that assignment. And it wasn't super rude. It was like kind of in the context of a lot of different things. I do find that, I think I've said this already, like I do find that when people are really like engaged with their peers and trying to be helpful to each other, that's when people tend to do the best on their assignments. Like groups that work really well together tend to be, as a whole, like they're working with each other and asking questions, so they're clearer about the assignment as a whole and aware of what they're supposed to be working on, and tend to, like as a whole group, like tend to be making higher grades because they're building off of each other. So it is really important in that way. Being specific and using complete thoughts. I know you've gotten on a paper before like needs more, or like just a question mark, and then you're left with like, well, what is the question? When you're saying things like needs more, like, and I've gotten that on papers before, but like, what do you need more of? Like words. One of the most unhelpful things you can tell people is that their paper is too short, because if they know how long the paper is supposed to be and it could be longer, like, it would be. What they need help with is figuring out where to add things, like where they need examples. If that's what's missing, is what's missing that they don't have research in this area. Is it that, what is it that they need more of? Like what would be helpful for them to include? That's typically what people need, not needs more or good job, or question mark. Like what is it that you had a question about? Like really explaining yourself and using complete thoughts, and like saying like if they need more, or if something seems missing, like what exactly is the problem? Like what do you have a question about? I am gonna, with this one, I have these in the footnotes kind of explained, like focusing on HOCs versus LOCs. And that sometimes that also kind of goes back to like focusing on where they are in the process. We've talked about grammar before, and I'm not trying to make the point that grammar is unimportant. I've said that like one of the big red flags is, for a source, is that they haven't checked their grammar before they published that page or that article. So it is important, but it's more about being effective. And not being overwhelmed, and moving through the process in the most efficient way possible. And here's what I mean. If you are, an HOC is a higher order of concern, meaning it's something that's going to cause you to have to like move, add, or delete content. You are going to have to like maybe change your thesis, which changes your paper. Maybe it has a lack of focus. That's going to cause you to have to go in and make big changes, right? Additional research, you're going to have to go add. Maybe you need more examples. Maybe you need to move. You need to reorganize like how you're presenting your ideas. Those things are going to cause you to have to change content and move things around. If you're also, like, if someone gives you those things and gives you grammar errors, what's going to happen is you're going to probably fix the grammar errors first, right? Because it's like the easiest. Then go back and rearrange things, and now what you have is a whole new set of grammar errors that you have to fix. So it's not that you shouldn't fix those things, it's that those things are more editing. You can wait until the paper is set before you start looking for spelling and typos and little like transitions and like citation errors. Like, wait till you're not moving, adding, or deleting stuff before you deal with those things. Go for like what is going to cause people to have to make the biggest changes. And again, it's about considering where that person is in the process and where you are in the process, and making it easier on other people and making it easier on yourself. Reading as another peer versus like trying to be the teacher. One of the things I tell people is that, I'm already going to read from the teacher lens. Like, I wrote the assignment sheet, I wrote what the goals are, like, I'm already going to read for those things. So it's not necessarily helpful to have lots of other people giving you the same thing, when one of the things that you get from having other people read your work is that they have lots of different knowledge bases and ways of explaining things and opinions. You might engage with other peers that know a lot more about your topic than I do, and that's where they could help you. Or they think differently and they can help you understand that perspective better than I could. I will think about like your research and your writing, but your peers can do something possibly different for you than I could. And that's what you want to think about doing. Reading as another peer or reading as another student in the room. One of the things you can do is talk about what your questions are about that assignment. And everybody like being clear, like reading this work, reading this person's paper as another person in the class, trying to figure out the same thing, like trying to figure out how to navigate the same assignment. That's often one way you can really help people, is just talking about what you're supposed to be doing, what you're supposed to be working on, what questions you have, like being clear, not just as a reader, but as another student in the room. Like, what do you think, Professor E is expecting here? What does she mean by this? Like, just asking assignment questions, is another way that you could kind of go about this and have it be helpful. So rather than thinking about having like to correct people as the teacher, thinking about it just being as a reader, someone being that audience and asking, questions and sharing opinions and maybe giving like suggestions or ideas. Maybe saying like, here's where I was a little confused, like maybe giving, some of that. And then also like asking like assignment questions and getting clear about everything. And that's another like helpful thing about peer review, and seeing how other people, how other people are doing it and getting ideas that way. Use all critical reading tips. Again, that's the anchor, because this is what I've kind of been talking about. Don't feel like you just need to evaluate. That takes the pressure off of peer review. You don't have to feel like an expert. You don't have to feel like you need to correct them. You are just reading as another person in the class trying to figure out the same assignment. You are talking about like, I'm learning, trying to say like, here's what it sounds like you want to do. A lot of you will like either have or will notice that I do that a lot with your inquiry project. So it sounds like you're wanting to focus on this, or it sounds like the point you want to make is this. Trying to explain what you're hearing so that they know whether they're making it clear enough. There's a lot of things that you can do to be helpful. So I guess one of the like biggest things to take away from peer review is to take the pressure off of yourself, feeling like peer response in classes is trying to correct people or trying to be the expert in the room, when that's kind of the point. I mean, not the point. And if you take that way off and understand that there's already a teacher in the room that's gonna possibly like correct or suggest or be reading from that lens, and that your goal is to be another student and another reader just talking with other people about what they're doing and about what you all are doing, that can come at the assignment from a lot of different angles and make your peer responses more comfortable, probably more interesting, because you're not just reading through for like stuff you need to fix or grammar errors or things like that. So probably makes it a little bit more interesting and a little bit more genuine, and really gets at that like critical reading, like the whole like scope of that a little bit better.